ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد, then to continue with Usool Al Thalatha, the three fundamental principles of Sheikh al-Islam Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab rahimahullah, with the explanation of Sheikh Saleh-Al-Fawzan hafidhahullah. Then last time we had the two actions of worship, or we had rather three actions of worship mentioned at the end of the list of acts of worship, at the end of the first fundamental principle. We made the beginning on the second fundamental principle, the second fundamental principle, the second main part of the book. So from what we had last week was al-istighatha, seeking rescue and deliverance, calling for rescue at times of calamity and difficulty. And we had that Sheikh Al-Fawzan mentioned that it is of two types. Al-istighatha is of two types. A type which is worship, and is to be directed to Allah alone, and a type which is not worship. The difference being that the first type is with regard to those matters that only Allah can bring about, those things that only Allah can do. A person's in a dire situation, a dire calamity, that no one can rescue him from. No one from the creation can rescue him from that. Only Allah can rescue him from that. So seeking rescue and deliverance in that condition, istighatha in that condition, is a matter of worship, and directing it to other than Allah, whether it be the dead or the jinn or the like, that will be shirk. And the second case is if a person is in a calamity, a situation of great difficulty, and requests rescue from a created being who is present, who is alive, who is able to help him in that situation, then that is permissible for him to call for help from that created being who is alive, present, and able to help. That will not be worship, that is a matter which is permissible for him to call in that meaning. The second act of worship that's mentioned in the list was al-dhabh, slaughtering or sacrificing. And that, Sheikh Al-Fawzan divided that into four categories. The first of them being that which is directly worship, sacrificing an animal in the manner of taqarrub and ta'zeem. You sacrifice an animal to draw closer to someone and to venerate and honour and show honour and respect to the one you are slaughtering for. Then that is a matter of worship and cannot be except for Allah the Most High. We cannot sacrifice animals to show veneration and to seek to draw closer except to Allah the Most High. Then he mentioned and of course doing that to other than Allah, sacrificing for the jinn or for the dead or the like, this will be shirk. To venerate someone in the grave or to show honour and respect for someone in the grave, you make a sacrifice for them, this is shirk. Then the second type of sacrificing and slaughtering animal was that Sheikh Al-Fawzan mentioned, that a person slaughters an animal because he needs to get some meat, he needs some meat. So he has an animal, so he slaughters it in the name, obviously mention the name of Allah upon it, and slaughtering it. His intention being to gain meat from that and eat, to feed himself or feed his family or sell it or whatever. The Shaykh said there's no harm with that, that's permissible. Because he's not seeking to draw closer to the one he's slaughtering for. The butcher, for example, is not slaughtering, seeking to get close to his customer and honour and venerate his customer with this sacrifice. No, it's just make the meat, slaughter the animal, get the meat, sell the meat, or the like. The third case that the Shaykh mentioned was sacrifices which are done on occasions of joy and happiness. That something, a happy occasion comes about, so the person makes a sacrifice, obviously again in Allah's name. In each case it's sacrificing Allah's name, but he's doing it because it's a happy occasion, so he sacrifices the meat and then he feeds the people with the meat on that happy occasion. The Shaykh again said there's no harm in that. Again, he's not doing it as a veneration of the people who are there, he's not doing the sacrifice in their name to venerate them, to draw closer to them. He's not doing it for that reason. And the last case the Shaykh mentioned was that an animal is slaughtered in order to obtain the meat from it and to give it out in charity to the poor and the needy. Sheikh mentioned this is a matter of giving in charity, that there's needy people there, he has an animal, so he sacrifices it, and he gives out the meat to help the poor and needy. And this is a good act. As the Shaykh said, it's something which is sunnah, and it enters therefore within what is worship. Again, the animal is sacrificed in Allah's name, with the intention of feeding the poor, which itself is a good act. That this is a sunnah, and it enters within, therefore, it enters within worship, something rewardful. The third act of worship in the list of examples, of course, these are, as we heard, Sheikh Fawzan mentioned, these are just examples, and there are many other acts of worship, but these are just common examples and important examples of worship. People need to know these actions are worship and what aspects of them are worship. The last of them was an-nadhr, making vows. As Sheikh Fawzan mentioned, that an-nadhr is to make something, as a person makes something binding upon himself. He says, I vow that I will do such and such action. I vow that I will make a fast for Allah of 3 days, or I vow that I will give such and such amount in charity for Allah's sake. Something that's not obligatory in the origin of the legislation. Originally it wasn't obligatory upon him, but he makes it obligatory upon himself by making it a vow. I vow that I will do such and such. And the Shaykh mentioned this, making vows is worship, ibadah. It cannot be done except for Allah. You cannot make a vow in anyone else's name. I vow to such and such. Not permissible except that you make a vow for Allah. And making vows for those in the graves, or making vows for those from the creation, is shirk. And then Sheikh Al-Fawzan divided vows into 2 categories. Those which are vows which are obedience to Allah, a vow to do an act of obedience for Allah, another of ta'ah, obedience. Then if a person makes that vow, it's obligatory upon him that he carries it out. He makes a vow that I will give in charity, for example, a certain amount in charity. He's made the vow now, then it becomes upon him that he has to do that, he has to carry it out. It wasn't obligatory upon him to begin with, but now he's made it upon himself with the vow, he has to do it. And then there are vows which are ma'asiyah, vows of disobedience to Allah. A person should not make those vows, and they're not to be carried out. And just with regard to vows, we have a side point from Sheikh Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymeen, rahimahullah. We have the ayah, ثُمَّ لِيَقْضُوا تَفَثَهُمْ وَلْيُوفُوا نُذُورَهُمْ وَلْيَطَّوَّفُوا بِالْبَيْتِ الْعَتِيقِ. With regard to vows, with the explanation, then let them complete their rites of Hajj and fulfill their vows, and let them perform tawaf around the ancient house. Then I gave the wrong reference to that. It's of course not Surah Al-Baqarah at all. And anyone who looked in Surah Al-Baqarah for it, they have a long experience and not found it. It's in Surah Al-Hajj, because the brother was correcting me just after. Surah Al-Hajj, the 22nd Surah, ayah 29. So correction there. So then we moved on to the second fundamental principle of the book, of the 3 fundamental principles. The second one, Al-Asl Al-Thani, Ma'rifatu Din al-Islami bil-Adillah, knowledge and awareness of Islam with its proofs. And here, of this just being a summary of some of the points we had, or some of the main points we had, then Sheikh Al-Fawzan explained what is the meaning of deen of Islam, the deen. That in the Arabic language, the word deen carries 2 meanings. The deen, what we call the religion of Islam as such, use the English religion. And in Arabic, the word deen, it carries 2 meanings. Firstly, at-ta'ah, it means obedience. And the second language usage of the word deen, it means al-hisab, reckoning. As in the ayah that Shaykh mentioned, Maliki Yawmiddin. The ayah from Surah Al-Fatiha, the description of our Lord, Allah Most High, as being Maliki Yawmiddin, the sovereign owner of the day of deen, the day of reckoning. So the deen, the word deen, the religion of Islam, the deen of Islam, carries those 2 meanings in the language, ta'ah, obedience, and hisab, reckoning. And Shaykh Al-Fawzan mentioned that we know bil-adillah, that we should know our deen based upon proofs. I mean proofs from the book and the sunnah, and not just following what the people, we just follow the masses of the people, whatever the people do. Whatever the masses of the people do, we follow them, and that is, as far as we're concerned, that's the deen. Whatever they do, we do. Whatever they don't do, we don't do, and that's just it. That is not the way. Blind following of the mass of the people is not the way we are to obtain our knowledge of what is Islam. Then, to continue with the second fundamental principle, having taken the first part last week, Al-Asl Al-Thani, Ma'rifatu Din al-Islami bil-Adillah, the second fundamental principle, knowledge of the religion of Islam with its proofs. Then there comes on page 157, page 152 of the Egyptian edition, the saying of the author, Sheikh al-Islam, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, rahimahullah. He brings an actual definition, a comprehensive definition of what Islam is. Our religion, Islam, what does it mean? What is Islam? He said, وهو الاستسلام له بالتوحيد والانقياد له بالطاعة والبراءة من الشرك وأهله. He said, and it, in defining Islam, what is Islam, what is this religion of Islam, and it is al-istislam, to submit to him with tawheed, and al-inqiyad, and to yield to him with obedience, and al-bara'a, and to free oneself from shirk and its people. And it is to submit to him with tawheed, and to yield to him with obedience, and to free oneself from shirk and its people. So he defines Islam in those three sentences, those 3 points. Sheikh Al-Fawzan, hafidhahullah, he explains this by saying, Al-Islam. Explain the word Islam, where it's extracted from in the Arabic language. He said, Al-Islam is derived from Aslama, this shape. From the language, from the verb, with the root sin and lam and meen, 4th root of that. Aslama. And he said in the Arabic language, Aslama lishay. He submitted, with it said meaning, he submitted to it. He said in Arabic, Aslama lishay. He did Aslama to that thing, to mean he submitted to it. Then he gives an example, meaning so the word Aslama means submission. He gives an example of the language. He said, Aslama nafsahu bil qatl. As it said in the language, he submitted himself to being killed. Aslama nafsahu, he submitted himself to being killed. Meaning, khada'a bil qatl. He submitted to being killed. So Aslama, a person Aslama himself, he did Islam of himself, means that he submitted to that thing. Then the Shaykh goes on and says, so therefore, Islam is submitting one's face and one's purpose and resolve and one's intention to him, he the mighty and majestic. That's what Islam is, submitting one's face and one's purpose and resolve and one's intention to him, the mighty and majestic. Then he gives 2 ayahs as proof for this, and the Shaykh explains afterwards. The first ayah he mentions, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ دِينًا مِمَّنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ وَاتَّبَعَ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا. Surah An-Nisa, the 4th surah, ayah 125, with the explanation, and who is better in deen, and who is better in religion than one who aslama wajhahu, than one who submits his face to Allah, and he is a doer of the good which Allah legislated, and he follows the religious way of Ibrahim, upright upon his way, turning away from shirk. And he quotes the second ayah, بَلَا مَنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ. Surah Al-Baqarah, the 2nd surah, ayah 112, with the explanation, rather whoever aslama wajhahu, rather whoever submits his face for Allah, whoever submits his face to Allah. Shaykh said meaning, as meant here by aslama wajhahu lillah, which means he submits his face for Allah. The Shaykh said meaning, akhlasa amalahu lillahi azza wa jalla. Sheikh Al-Fawzan gives the same explanation here, as given by Al-Hafidh ibn Kathir and others from Mufassirin, meaning he makes his deeds purely and sincerely for Allah the Mighty and Majestic, and he yields to Allah obediently and by choice and with desire and out of love. Then Sheikh Al-Fawzan explains the phrase, the definition of Islam with the first part of the phrase, that it is al-istislamu lillahi bit-tawheed. That Islam is submitting to Allah with tawheed. Sheikh Al-Fawzan said. And it is ifradullahi jalla wa ala bil-ibadah. And it is to single out Allah, the Majestic and Most High, with worship. And this is the meaning of Tawheed. So whoever worships Allah alone, attributing no partner to Him, then he has indeed submitted to Him. And that's what is meant by submitting to Allah, submitting to Tawheed. He said, his saying, وَالْإِنْقِيَادُ لَهُ سُبْحَانَهُ بِالطَّاعَةِ, quoting the second phrase of the three. And al-inqiyad, and yielding, complying, yielding to Him, He the Perfect, with obedience. Sheikh Fawzan said, regarding whatever He has commanded you with, and whatever He has forbidden you from. So whatever He commanded you with, then you do it. And whatever He forbade you from, then you avoid it. You avoid it in obedience to Allah, the Perfect and Most High. Then he mentions the third of the three phrases in definition of what al-Islam is. He's saying, وَالْبَرَاءَةُ مِنَ الشِّرْكِ وَأَهْلِهِ, and freeing oneself, al-bara'ah, freeing oneself, or disassociating oneself, and freeing oneself from shirk and its people. Sheikh Al-Fawzan said, al-bara'ah, freeing oneself, disassociating oneself, means cutting off from, and separating from, and being far removed from shirk and from the people of shirk, such that you believe the falsity of shirk and that you keep away from it. You believe in your heart that it is something false, and you keep away from it with your actions. Just as a side point, then that's how Sheikh Ahmad al-Najmi explained likewise, freedom from shirk, meaning that you purify your aqeedah, you purify your belief and your deeds from shirk. That's the meaning of freeing oneself from shirk. So Sheikh Fawzan said, just repeat his last phrase, he said, such that you believe the falsity of shirk and you keep away from it. And you believe in the obligation of having enmity towards the people of shirk, the mushrikeen, because they are enemies to Allah, the Mighty and Majestic. So therefore you do not take them as awliya, beloved friends and allies. Rather you take them as being enemies, because they are enemies to Allah and to His Messenger and to His religion. So therefore you do not have love for them, and you do not have love and alliance with them. Rather you cut off from them with regard to the religion, and you distance yourself from them, and you believe in the falseness, you are certain of aqeedah, you have belief, certain belief in the falseness of what they are upon. So therefore you do not love them with your heart, and you do not aid them with your sayings and with your actions, because they are enemies to your Lord and enemies to your religion. So how can you have love and alliance with them when they are enemies of Islam? Shaykh said, it is not sufficient that you just submit to Allah and comply, or it is not sufficient that you submit to Allah and yield to Him with obedience, but do not free yourself from shirk and nor from the people of shirk. This does not suffice, this will not suffice. You will not be counted as being a Muslim until you have these characteristics, in all these three. And he mentions them. Firstly, al-istislamu lillahi bil-tawheed, three characteristics which the author mentioned as being the definition of Islam. You will not be a true Muslim until you have these three. Firstly, submitting to Allah with tawheed. Secondly, yielding to Him with obedience. Thirdly, freeing oneself from those who oppose tawheed. Or rather, he said, freeing oneself from that which opposes tawheed and that which opposes obedience. And it is a shirk. Until you have all these three, the first being submitting to Allah with tawheed, the second being yielding to Him with obedience, and thirdly, freeing oneself from whatever opposes those first two. Whatever opposes tawheed and whatever opposes obedience to Allah, which is what the Shaykh said, and it is shirk. Fourthly, freeing oneself from the people of shirk. Freeing oneself from the people of shirk. So the Shaykh knows that he divides it into actually four matters that are essential. Then he said, by actualizing these characteristics, you will be a Muslim. As for if you miss out on a single characteristic from them, then you will not be a Muslim. So in these three words, in the three words that the author summarized Islam in, the Shaykh summarized the definition of Islam. And how many a person does not know the meaning of Islam? Because he has not learned this thing. And if it was said to him, what is Islam? He will not give you a correct response. Well, the Sheikh's not just referring to obviously the people, the unbelievers, the disbelievers, even the Muslims, many of them. If you ask them even the simplest question, what is your religion? What is your religion? Islam? What is Islam? Then they will not give you a correct answer. They may give you an answer, but it will not be very often a correct answer. Even that simple basic question, you won't get a correct answer. The Shaykh said, because it's not something they've learned. Many people, it's just something too basic. I'm a Muslim already, I know what Islam is. And many people regard it being something too basic, too basic for us. We don't even study that. So they never learn what is correct in that regard. But the Shaykh said that's why very often you won't get a correct response from them. Then there comes a small heading, or a few small subheadings here, Maratibuddin, the levels of the religion. Al-Martabatul Ula Al-Islam, وهو ثلاث مراتب. The levels of the religion, the first level is Al-Islam, and it is of three levels. And it was the saying of the author, Shaykh al-Islam, Al-Islam, the first of the three levels. So remember, we're on the second fundamental principle now, knowledge and awareness of the religion of Islam. So he mentions the first of the levels, the three levels of the religion of Islam is Al-Islam. That's the first level. Sheikh Al-Fawzan said, explaining, the meaning of Al-Maratib, levels, is Ad-Darajat, ascending levels. Because we have said that Islam is of three levels. Some of them, or each of them being some of them being higher than others. The first levels the first level from the levels of the religion is Islam. That's the first level. Then after it there comes Iman. Then after it there comes Al-Ihsan. So therefore Islam, the first level, Al-Islam, is wider, more extensive, wider, broader. And Iman is something more restricted than Islam. And Al-Ihsan is more restricted than Iman. And those are the ascending levels. The Islam is broader, it covers more. The term Islam, it covers something more. Iman is something more restricted, more particular. And Ihsan is the most particular of the lot, the highest and most particular of all three. He said, so the scope or the sphere of Islam is wide. The munafiqun, the hypocrites, they enter within it if they outwardly comply with Islam, and they outwardly display it, and they outwardly adhere to it. In Islam, what's apparent from Islam, as Shaykh mentions, rulings of Islam in this world, outward rulings of Islam that we judge, even the hypocrites enter into that. As long as they outwardly display Islam, that all we see from a person in his heart, he may be a hypocrite, but we don't see that. Outwardly we just see him displaying Islam, complying with Islam. That's all we can see. Then, as far as we can see, he falls within the definition of Islam, apparent Islam. As the Shaykh said, the scope or sphere of Islam is wide. The munafiqun, the hypocrites, they enter within it if they outwardly comply with Islam, and they outwardly display it, and they adhere to it outwardly. If they pray along with the Muslims, and they give the zakat, and they do the outward actions, then they are called Muslims. They are called Muslims. And the rulings of the Muslims apply upon them. In this world, obviously in this world, in the next life a different matter, but in this world the rulings of the Muslims apply upon them. So they have whatever the Muslims have, and upon them will be whatever is upon the Muslims. However, in the hereafter they will be in the lowest depth of the fire, because they do not have Iman, faith. They do not have true faith. Rather, they have just apparent or outward Islam only. As it's preceded, then the meaning of munafiqun mean those who in their hearts they do not believe in Islam. They believe that in their hearts they hold kufr, unbelief, disbelief. They're disbelievers in their hearts. But for their own goals they display Islam outwardly. To the people and to the Muslims they display Islam, they practice Islam, they comply with Islam outwardly, but in their hearts they don't believe in it. That is al-munafiqun. So Shaykh makes the point, as long as outwardly all we see is they comply with Islam, follow Islam, then we give them the rights of the Muslims. That's all we see from them, so we treat them as being Muslims. In the next life though, they will be in the lowest depth of the fire. Then Shaykh mentions the second level. The author, Shaykh al-Islam, mentions the next two levels, the second highest level and the highest level. Wal-Iman wal-Ihsan. So the three levels of Islam are Al-Islam, which we just had, and Al-Iman and Al-Ihsan. Sheikh Al-Fawzan said, he's saying Al-Iman, this is the second level. Iman, so Islam is the first, Iman is the second level. And the Mu'minun, the people of Iman, the people who have Iman, the believers, the Mu'minun, they vary in their levels. So from them are Al-Muqarrabun, those who draw especially close through good deeds. And from them are Al-Abrar, the righteous ones. And Shaykh Al-Fawzan mentions these two. So as for the first of these two, Al-Muqarrabun, they are the people of the highest of the levels. And the Abrar, the second ones, are lesser than them. And from them there are those who are Al-Zalim li nafsihi, the person who is one who wrongs himself. He's a believer, but he is one who is in the category of one who wrongs himself. And Shaykh Fawzan explains that. And he is the one who commits major sins, which are less than shirk. He commits major sins, but as long as they're lesser than shirk. And some of the explainers mentioned these three levels. This now referring to the people of Iman, Mu'minun. Obviously all the Mu'minun fall into the first thing, Islam, they're all Muslims. Now on to the second level, the Mu'minun. They, the Mu'minun, people of Iman, are divided into three categories. The Shaykh said, the highest of them being Al-Muqarrabun. Some of the explainers mentioned those who do all the obligatory acts, who do what's obligatory upon them, and they hasten to do the recommended acts as well. And they leave aside what is forbidden for them. And they hasten to leave aside anything, even if it's disliked. Even if it's not forbidden, but it's disliked, they hasten to avoid it as well. Yeah, some of them define that. Muqarrabun, those who especially draw close in that way. And they say, as for the Abrar, then there are those who carry out the obligatory duties, and they keep away from what is forbidden. And the third one, as Sheikh Al-Fawzan himself directly explained, and the third category of the believers, the dhalim li nafsihi, one who falls into major sins, but which are less than shirk. Then Sheikh Al-Fawzan quotes the ayah as proof for this. He said, or first he mentions the believer of the third category, al-dhalim li nafsihi, the one who falls into major sin which is less than shirk, then he is mu'minun fasiq, he is a sinful believer, or he is mu'min naqisul iman, a believer who is deficient in iman. That's the third category, one who is dhalim li nafsihi, one who wrongs himself. He's a believer but he wrongs himself, falls into major sin. Then it can be described as in one of these two ways: mu'minun fasiq, a believer but who is sinful believer, or a believer who is deficient in his iman. And he gives the evidence. He, the Most High, said, ثُمَّ أَوْرَثْنَا الْكِتَابَ الَّذِينَ اصْطَفَيْنَا مِنْ عِبَادِنَا فَمِنْهُمْ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ وَمِنْهُمْ مُقْتَصِدٌ وَمِنْهُمْ سَابِقٌ بِالْخَيْرَاتِ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ ذَلِكَ هُوَ الْفَضْلُ الْكَبِيرُ. Surah Fatir, the 35th surah, ayah 32. With the explanation, then we gave the scripture as inheritance to those whom we chose from our servants. So from them are those who are dhalimun li nafsihi, from them are those who wrong themselves, and from them are those who take a middle course, and from them are those who are foremost upon good deeds by the permission of Allah. And that is the great bounty. And the people of Tafsir, explain that ayah likewise as we just mentioned. That those who are dhalimun li nafsihi mean those who fall into some of the major sins which are less than shirk. Those who take a muqtasid, those who are described here as muqtasid, and those who do what's obligatory upon them, and then leave what's forbidden. And then those who are sabiqun bil khairat, those who are foremost upon good, those who do whatever is obligatory, but not only that, they also hasten to do whatever is recommended. And likewise, they avoid whatever is forbidden, but they also hasten to avoid anything and keep away from whatever is disliked as well. Wallahu a'lam. Then Sheikh Al-Fawzan moves on to the third category, the third and the highest level of Islam. He said, he's saying al-ihsan. Literally, from the word to mean to do something well. Sheikh said, this is the third level, and it is al-ihsan. And it is that the servant does well with regard to what is between him and Allah. So he's to perfect or do well what is between him and Allah. He does well in the worship of Allah, the perfect, he does well in the worship of Allah, the mighty and majestic. And the Prophet ﷺ mentioned al-ihsan. So he said, al-ihsanu an ta'bud Allah كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. The Prophet ﷺ, as we will see, referred to in this being part of the hadith of Jibreel, famous hadith of Jibreel, that Prophet ﷺ said, al-ihsan is that you worship Allah as if you are seeing Him, and even though you do not see Him, then He certainly sees you. In a footnote they mention this is a part of the long hadith reported by Al-Bukhari, number 50, and by Muslim, numbers 9 and 10, from a hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. As the brothers will be well aware from the lessons of Sheikh Falah, hafidhahullah, this is also reported by Muslim as hadith number 8, from the hadith of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, being a famous hadith of Jibreel, the second hadith of Al-Nawawi's 40 hadith. The Prophet ﷺ defined these three levels of Islam and Iman and Ihsan. Then comes the saying of Shaykh al-Islam, وَكُلُّ مَرْتَبَةٍ لَهَا أَرْكَانٍ, and every level has pillars. And every one of these three levels has its pillars. Shaykh al-Fawzan said, his saying, وَكُلُّ مَرْتَبَةٍ لَهَا أَرْكَانٍ, and every level has its pillar. Every level has pillars. He defines pillars, arkan. He said, al-arkan, pillars, is the plural of rukn, a pillar. And it is that which something stands upon. A rukn, a pillar, is something which something else stands or rests upon. So the arkan of something, the pillars of something, are its aspects which it stands upon. And it cannot stand without them. The thing cannot stand without the pillars. Without the pillars it will fall down, it won't stand. And they are within the thing itself. When they are apart, they are within the thing itself. Contrary to ash-shurut, contrary to conditions, for they are outside the thing. So the Shaykh here makes a distinction between, he goes on to give the example of the prayer. So he makes a distinction between the arkan of something, the pillars of something, and the shurut of something. Both of these, shurut, conditions, and arkan, pillars, both are things which the thing which is built upon them, they are necessary for that thing. If the shurut are not present, the conditions of something are not present, the thing itself will not be present. If the arkan for something are not present, the thing will not be present, it will fall down. And the difference is that a shart, a condition, is something which is outside the thing itself, whereas a rukn is something which is within, is part of the thing itself. That's the difference. But as for it being essential, then they're both essential. It's just whether they're within the thing itself or whether they're outside the thing itself. The Shaykh made that clear with the example. He said, for example, the conditions, the shurut of the prayer, then they are outside the prayer and come before it. Conditions for the prayer, for example, wudu. The wudu is a shart for the prayer, but it's something outside the prayer. It's essential for the prayer, but it's outside. The act of wudu, making wudu, is not from the prayer itself, it's outside. So it's a shart. Which I said, so the likes of the conditions, the shurut of the prayer, then they are outside the prayer, coming before it. And as for the arkan, the pillars of the prayer, then they are inside it, such as the takbiratul ihram, the initial takbir of the prayer, and the recitation of the al-Fatiha, they come within it. So that makes the difference there. An example of shart, condition for the prayer, something the prayer is essential for the prayer is wudu. Because it's essential, the prayer is essential, has to be there, but it's outside the prayer. Whereas recitation of the initial takbir and recitation of the Fatiha, again the prayer is essential, that's essential for the prayer, but it's within the prayer, so it's a rukn, a pillar. Then he said, so if anything from them is missing, then the prayer will not be correct. Just, if anything from the conditions or the pillars of the prayer are missing, the prayer will not be correct. Just as, if there was something missing from the pillars which hold up a building, then it will not stand and it will not be supported. If there was a pillar, is something essential for the thing. Just saying that a pillar, a supporting pillar for a building, if it's taken away, the building will not stand. Then there comes a small title, or a small subheading, Arkan al-Islam, the pillars of Islam. شهادة أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا رسول الله معناها ودليلها. The pillars of Islam, the testification that none has the right to be worshipped except Allah and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, its meaning and what it indicates, or its meaning and its proof. Its meaning and its proof. And he brings the saying of Shaykh al-Islam, فأركان الإسلام خمسة شهادة أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا رسول الله وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة وصوم رمضان وحج بيت الله الحرام. So the pillars of Islam are 5. The testification that none has the right to be worshipped except Allah and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and establishing the prayer and giving the zakah and fasting Ramadan and performing Hajj to Allah's sacred house. Sheikh Fawzan said in explanation, Islam will not stand, Islam will not be established except with these pillars. If they are missing, then Islam will not be upright, not be standing. And the rest of the acts of obedience, these 5 here, are not the only actions in Islam. They are not the only 5 actions of Islam. There are others and many other actions in Islam. But the Shaykh makes the point, the rest of the actions besides these 5 are mukammilat, are matters of completion for these pillars. All the actions of obedience and all good deeds, they are all actions of completion of these pillars. And therefore, when Jibreel alayhi salam asked Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam in the presence of the companions, saying, "Akhbirni al-Islam, inform me about Islam," he replied, "Al-Islamu an tashhad an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah wa tuqima as-salat wa tu'ti az-zakat wa tasuma Ramadan wa tahujja al-bayta in istata'ta ilayhi sabila." The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam responded, "Islam is that you bear witness that none has the right to be worshipped except Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and that you establish the prayer, and that you give the zakat, and that you fast Ramadan, and that you perform Hajj to the house if you are able to make your way to it." In a footnote they mention this, checking the referencing of this has preceded me on the previous page. It's part of the hadith, the same hadith, the long hadith of Jibreel. Sheikh Al-Fawzan said, so he explained Islam to be these 5 pillars. Then Sheikh Al-Fawzan makes an important point. However, so in this hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asked, what is Islam? So he mentioned these 5 pillars as being, what is Islam? Then the Sheikh makes an important point. He said, however, the hadith of Ibn Umar makes it clear that these 5 are the foundations of Islam. So he said, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in the hadith of Ibn Umar, "Buni al-Islam ala khams." Islam is built upon 5. The hadith, as I mentioned in the footnote, Islam is built upon 5. The hadith being reported by Al-Bukhari as hadith number 8, and by Muslim as hadith number 16, from a hadith of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu. And of course that being the 3rd hadith of Imam Nawawi's 40 hadith. Hadith of Ibn Umar, we got to the 5 pillars of Islam. Meaning that these 5 are not the whole of Islam. Rather, they are its pillars and its foundations which it rests upon. And the rest of the legislated matters are things which perfect and complete these pillars. We shouldn't understand just from the first hadith that Islam, the whole of Islam is just these 5 things, nothing else. There's nothing more to Islam than that. But rather, the hadith of Ibn Umar makes it clear that these are the 5 fundamental pillars, foundations, which the rest of Islam is built upon, and the rest of Islam being a completion of these 5. And that's where Sheikh Al-Fawzan ends explanation of that point. Just as an additional side point here, then Sheikh Zayd Al-Madkhali, Hafidhullah, he mentions with regard to the phrase وَإِقَامُ الصَّلَاةِ and establishment of the prayer. Sometimes people misunderstand the term establishment of the prayer just to mean that we praise the person, he prays, that's it, establishing prayer. But Shaykh Zayd al-Madkhali draws our attention to what establishing the prayer actually means, إِقَامُ الصَّلَاةِ. So what is meant by establishing the prayer is carrying it out, performing it, doing it in the correctly legislated manner, beginning with its purification and proceeding to carry out its arkan, its pillars and its conditions and those things which are obligatory, and doing it in the manner explained by Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his saying, or explained by Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam by his saying and his action. And he said, "Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli." Pray as you have seen me praying. Hadith reported by Bukhari, hadith 631, 6008, and 7246, and others. It's not just that the person he prays, but the person correctly establishes the prayer, as the Sheikh said, with its conditions and its pillars, and start doing it correctly. So the section that we're on at the moment is with regard to the second fundamental principle, knowledge and awareness of the religion of Islam, and that's quite a large section of the book. There'll be about, just to roughly summarise what comes next, In Shaa Allah, there are about 34 pages about Islam, which we've started here, about 34 pages of Islam, its 5 pillars, and their proofs. Then there comes about 24 pages with regard to Iman, the next level. Iman, and its 6 pillars, and their proofs. And then there comes around 20 pages with regard to Ihsan, and its proof. Ihsan with its 1 pillar and its proof. And then after that there comes the third fundamental principle of the book, knowledge and awareness of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Alhamdulillah, sallallahu ala Muhammad. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.